61 years ago today, December 7th, 1941, terror rained down on Pearl Harbor, Hickam Field, Ford Island, and other parts of the island of Oahu. The United States had been attacked from the air by Japan. Bodies and body parts were strewn throughout the island and its surrounding waters. Members of our Army and Naval forces were stunned. In addition to the physical agonies they were going through, there was a period of total mental disorientation. How could live ammunition be exploding all around? We were a nation at peace. I'm Mike Conway, and I'm a citizen of Glendora, California. Tonight, I am in awe. I am with a man named Teddy Roosevelt. His name alone is remarkable, but tonight his name is secondary to his history. Teddy Roosevelt is a Pearl Harbor survivor. He is also a veteran of an incredible 14 of the 17 campaigns fought in the Pacific Theater. Let's listen to Mr. Roosevelt's own words describing the attack on Pearl Harbor and his experiences in World War II. This morning, Ted joined us, and we were honored by his presence at the dedication of a new flagpole down at the Chamber of Commerce. And we raised a flag that has flown over Congress. Ted, good evening.
Good evening.
It's good to see you. We thank you for being at the dedication this morning. I really am honored. Your generation has done a service to this country that few will ever forget.
Well, it's my honor to have been there.
Where were you on the morning of December 7th, 1941?
I was aboard the USS Utah. We were moored just off from Ford Island. The colors had just been raised. It was about 5 minutes of 8 local time. And I believe that's when the attack started.
Were you alone?
No, I was with another fella. Believe it or not, his name was Abe Lincoln.
Lincoln?
Abe Lincoln.
Okay.
We were passing the time of the day, and we noticed a flight of aircraft coming in over Ford Island. And we've had these things happen before because our own planes would conduct practice raids. And looking up, I noticed the lead plane going into a very shallow dive, and the other planes were following it.
Well, what was your thought when you saw that?
I gave it no real thought because it was a common occurrence to see things like that. Then the thing I noticed right at this time, things happened kind of quick. I noticed this aircraft released a bomb, and it was painted bright yellow with red rings painted around it. And when it pulled out of this shallow dive, that bomb went into the PBY hangar at the end of Ford Island. And I turned to Abe and I says, this is the exact thing I said to him. Someone is really going to get into real trouble using live ammunition on a practice raid.
So you thought it was a practice raid coming down?
You bet.
Well, you were on the Utah, is that right? Where was that berth?
Well, that was just about 100 yards off from Ford Island. It was berthed to what they called in those days foxes. But I was standing on the fantail when this occurred. And then about that time, I never really watched the other planes go into their dives or anything because a lot of explosions were taking place. But the word was passed aboard ship to go to your bombing quarters. And the reason for that being, we had no general quarters because we had no guns. Probably the largest gun we had was the officer of the deck wearing a .45 caliber automatic, which I'm sure there wasn't any bullets for it.
So when they told you to go to bombing quarters,
that meant that each person had an assigned area where they went to, And my assigned area was 4 decks down below the top deck, the main deck.
So at this time, you weren't really aware you were under attack?
No, we hadn't been hit yet.
Okay. Was the Utah hit?
Yes, we took 2 fish, 2 torpedoes. Anyhow, I went down to bombing quarters, and just as I got there, we got hit with the first torpedo. And we didn't really know what it was or what had happened, because the ship just shuddered from the impact and the explosion. But a wall of water came in, I would guess, just surged into this compartment, probably about 8 feet deep, right away.
Yeah.
So the torpedo must have hit just forward of where we were.
Now, when you say we, again, are you talking, was Abe Lincoln with you?
Right.
You know, you have to excuse me, but when
That's
you think
fine.
of Teddy Roosevelt and Abe Lincoln, you know, sometimes they say that truth can be more unbelievable than, you know, fiction.
This
And
is
I
the
guess, you know, with Ted Roosevelt and Abe Lincoln on a battleship, it's something that people, you know, it's just some kind of coincidence, I guess,
Right.
in history. I don't know.
But then the second torpedo hit, and by that time we were just starting to list to port, because it takes a couple of minutes for this water to build up enough weight to cause the ship to capsize.
Did you actually see the torpedoes coming?
No, we were below deck.
Okay.
We weren't up on topside then. Anyhow, the water by that time, we were standing about amidships in this compartment, and the water was almost to the top of the bulkhead on the port side, but the starboard side, there wasn't any water there at all because of the way the ship was listing. It was listing to port. So I said to Abe, I says, we're going to die here, because everybody was on the ladder on the starboard side, and there were one person right behind another, plus there's others in line behind, and I knew if we got in line, we'd be the last ones in line. So the only thing I could say was, we better go underwater and swim up the ladder to the next deck on the port side, the side that was being hit.
Mm-hmm.
So we swam underwater and came out on the deck above, and the water at that time, even on that deck, was about 1 foot deep. So we just came up there, and then we had the ladders both sides that we could go up. So we just went right up to the top side, and by the time we got to top side, the ship was really capsizing quickly, because we weren't in watertight, what they call watertight integrity, which means each different compartment is sealed off with a watertight door. Mm-hmm. We hadn't established that because no one knew that anything was going to happen. So when we got to topside, we went underneath number 4 turret, and we probably stayed there, maybe for a minute. We really couldn't see what was happening out on Fort Allen, because the list of the ship being under the turret, you couldn't see out.
Well, when you were listing, and so you just kind of swam right off the deck into the water?
Well, when it capsized, the port side was almost right at water level. So that shows you how much it was tilting.
Yes.
We actually capsized in 5 minutes. That's how long they estimated it took from the first hit to our being capsized. But I went off the port side and then swam around the stern of the ship to Fort Allen. And Abe went off the starboard side. I don't know why we split up, but we did. And we both swam to Fort Allen, although I wish to tell you here that I never saw him again in real life until 1996 at a convention we had for the survivors of the USS Utah up in Salt Lake. And he thought I was dead, and I assumed he had been killed too, so.
I'll bet that was a nice surprise, huh?
It certainly was, yes.
So,
of course, I knew other members of the crew, but...
Right, but I mean, here's the man you were standing on the fan
Right,
field with, right?
right.
And 50 years later, you're reunited.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And neither one of us knew the other one was even alive.
Well, you left then, and you got off the ship, and then where did you go from there?
Well, as soon as I got ashore, then...
that was Fort Island, right?
Right.
And then what happened on Fort Island?
I went as soon as I got ashore, they were bombing the airstrip there. I can show you with this map here. But where this star is, that's the Utah there.
Yes.
And then it's about 100 yards offshore.
That's that gold star, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I swam ashore right there, and when I got ashore, the Japanese aircraft were bombing this airfield there. So I had seen a movie about 2 years prior to Pearl Harbor called All Quiet on the Western Front. And in this movie, the soldiers would, under bombardment, they would get in trenches. And the only trench that I could see once I got ashore was they were digging a foundation for a building. So all these bombs going off on the airfield there, and we were very close to the airfield. I dove into one of these trenches and stayed down until I heard no more bombs going off.
Which was probably a pretty smart decision.
Yeah, but for a 17-year-old kid, you know, I think I was doing the right thing at that time.
Well, it was peacetime. There was no indication of war. Is that right?
That's correct.
I mean, you're 17.
Yeah.
And I guess they didn't train you on the ship what to do in case you're being attacked on the land.
That's correct.
So good thing you saw the movie, huh?
Right. So then from there I got up and went over to this small building. And when I got in there, this gentleman in there told me, first he asked me if I was hurt, and I said no. And then he said, believe it or not, go in and take a shower, because I had oil all over my uniform. So I went in and took a shower, and when I came out, he says, just grab any clothes out of these lockers that you can find that to put on that is dry, and which I did. I wore a pair of knickers and a shirt. I didn't know it at the time, but I found out later it was where the officers changed their clothes to go play golf. So that's what I wore until December the 11th. But he asked me to help him because he said they're going to be bringing wounded in there, which they did. I had no first aid or medical experience at all. So whatever he told me to do, I did. You know, like tear up shirts or trousers or anything to cover wounds.
Well, you know, here you are on a ship. It's under attack. You're sunk. You swim to the island, and you get into the building. Were you afraid at that time? Were you scared?
Well, I wasn't as afraid then. I think it was more excitement than being afraid. But when the second wave came over, attack, then myself and the other people there, I'm sure, were afraid. And he told me, this fellow who turned out to be a doctor, he said, young man, don't be afraid. He says, just do what I tell you to do. He says, this building is bomb-proof. And believe it or not, being a youngster like I was then, I believed every word he said, and I had no fear whatsoever, nothing. It just, any fear that I had just vanished.
Let me ask you, did you get reassigned right away? Or did you get some time off? Or what happened after the attack?
No, as soon as I imagine we were in this building, well, completely through the second wave and maybe 3 or 4 hours afterwards, because no one knew if another wave was coming in of Japanese aircraft. And then they asked for volunteers, they didn't say for what, and they assigned me to burial detail, which meant going out in a whaleboat and picking up bodies. And then the next day, I was assigned to work at the cemetery.
Well, as a 17-year-old, I guess, standing there on a Sunday morning until the time you're out there in a whaleboat picking up bodies and doing burial detail, they really asked a 17-year-old to grow up in a hurry, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was a lot older than my age right away.
When did you get assigned to the Talbot? And what was the Talbot?
The Ralph Talbot, the USS Ralph Talbot, was a destroyer, and I got assigned to go aboard her the evening. It wasn't dark yet. I would say late afternoon of December the 11th, after we finished burial detail. And that they asked for volunteers for that too, and which I did. I just wanted to. I'd volunteer for anything, you know.
Was the Talbot engaged in any major campaigns in the Pacific?
Well, during the war, from day one through the Battle of Okinawa, we were engaged in 14 major battles out of 17. We missed 3.
Well, what could you tell me about a campaign when you went on? You know, you
well,
said you were
some
engaged
campaigns
in 14.
weren't as violent, or however you want to say it, as other campaigns. But at the start of the war, the campaigns were raids that we were making upon the Japanese. We were hitting them on, like, the first raid. In fact, the first battle we were in after Pearl Harbor was we raided the Marshall Islands, and we were operating with the Enterprise. The Enterprise was a carrier of ours, and our job was to be plane guard, which meant we followed right behind the carrier, and if we had any downed pilots, whether from accidents in landing or they run out of fuel and just ditched right in the ocean by the carrier, our job was to rescue we didn't care about the aircraft, just the pilot.
During these raids on your ship, do you ever think you were going to die?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but you have a job to do. You think about, well, you know, is this time it? But it doesn't affect what you do, the job you had to do. I'm not saying, I just don't want to give the impression here that I was a hero. All I did was the job that I had to do. And my job during the war, being assistant navigator, was to plot where we were, make corrections on charts.
Well, you say you weren't a hero, but I'll bet you, you know, in retrospect, everyone that was out there doing their job and supporting one another were heroes in one way or another. And of course, back home, I know everybody thought all of our military personnel were heroes. Did you ever have a girlfriend back home?
Nope, no girlfriend.
So the woman that you're married to now for slightly over 57 years.
Right.
You wrote her, didn't you?
Oh yeah, I wrote her
there?
4 or 5 times during the war, but I never received a reply from her. So.
Well, now, where did you and Carol's your wife, right?
Right.
When did you and your wife Carol meet?
We met. She was 9 years old and I was 12, and she came to my sister's birthday party. That's when we met. But I never paid her any mind at all. I never paid her any attention to her, you know, really.
Well, I talked to her for a moment, you know. I'm kind of sneaky. But when I was talking to her, she said, yeah, she remembered going to that birthday party, and she said, wow, there's a good-looking, pretty sharp guy there. But she said you didn't have any time for it at all. Because I guess at that time, you would have been, what, about
12.
12, and she would have been 9? And we know how 9-year-olds and 12-year-olds get along at that time, right?
Right.
But I understand that during the course of the years there, because you lived in the same neighborhood, she went to school with your sister, that there would be what they call neighborhood parties.
Right.
And that she'd always make sure she got over there.
Yeah.
And maybe escort her some other way, but she always had you walk her home, she said.
Right,
Because
yeah.
she would make sure some excuse to get you to walk her home.
Well, she trusted me, you know.
Uh-huh.
She knew that everything would be all right, you know. Because some of the other guys, you know, she thought they were, well, in today's language, they're kind of creepy, you know, some of them. So.
Well, let's see. Now, when you're in the service, you're 17.
Right.
And then, of course, she would have been, I guess, 14 at the time.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
But you wrote her letters, is that correct?
Well, I didn't write her right away.
No.
When the war started, you know. We were kind of busy.
Yeah, did you write your family?
I would write them maybe once every 3 months.
Oh.
To let them, and you couldn't say anything. You couldn't tell them anything.
Right.
So all I'd put, this is the truth, this is what I'd write in the letter. To my mother, and then I would put, all is well, signed Ted. That's it.
Well, you know, of course, my secret informant, being your wife, said that she moved to Arcadia.
Right.
And she said that she kept up with you through the family. But did you wrote her a letter, and did she read that one night, and she said, this is a person that is a kind, good person. Yeah. And she said at that time she started writing you letters, and she may have written 10 or 15 letters. But I understand you didn't get any of those letters. Is that right?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
And further, she went on. Do you know what did she tell your mother when she didn't receive?
She said.
Or what did you tell your mother when you didn't receive any letters?
I told her that to tell her that she could hang herself from the tallest timber. That's what I told.
Because you kind of felt like she was just not answering you. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Right.
That's
and then when did you get those letters? Or
we received those letters in the mail after we were married, and this was after the war. So
that must have been a real surprise for both of you.
Yeah, we got a kick out of opening them up and looking at them, you know.
Oh, that's wonderful. And when did you get married?
Got married November the 9th, 1945.
And you got out of the service when?
October 31st.
So that was pretty quick.
9 days after I got out, yeah. So.
Okay, well, let's go back to the Pacific for a minute, if it's okay with
Sure.
you. What can you tell me about the Guadalcanal Campaign? One of the most famous World War II campaigns around, or at least as far as everybody in America heard about the Guadalcanal.
Well,
around, or at least as far as everybody in America heard about the Guadalcanal.
Well, I would say the Guadalcanal Campaign, off and on, we operated around there for 13 months. Well, in this channel, they called it Iron Bottom Sound, for good reason. Anyhow, on one side of the channel was the island of Guadalcanal, and on the opposite side of this channel was an island called Tulagi. But then on the north was a real small island called Savo Island. Now all these islands were extinct volcanoes. That's what they had been. But anyhow, during the first Battle of Guadalcanal, when we landed our Marines there, August 7th of 42, our job was to bombard the beach at Guadalcanal. And then at night we were to move on a picket line between Savo Island and Tulagi. And the Patterson, a sister ship of ours, was to be in the picket line between Savo and Guadalcanal. Prior to the battle, they had a float plane that flew over all of our ships, and it had, believe it or not, its running lights on. and no one shot at it because I don't know who got the idea that it was one of ours, and it wasn't one of ours. All this plane was doing was giving the admiral, the Japanese admiral, a disposition as to where our ships were. So anyhow, at about 1:30 or 2 in the morning local time, their fleet entered the slot between...
Now the slot,
That's this...
what would that be? Can you give us a...
Yeah, that would be between the island of Savo and Guadalcanal. And they were coming down from the north. And when they entered the slot, the Patterson, that was her patrol area, she issued over our TBS, strange ships entering the slot. Anyhow, these Jap ships came in this area and they went by the Canberra, which was an Australian heavy cruiser, and the Chicago, one of our cruisers. And all they did was make a pass around, and they knew exactly where every ship of ours were. And no one was at general quarters. None of our ships were at general quarters. And they opened up on the Canberra and the Chicago. The only thing they did, they sank the Canberra. Well, she stayed afloat until the next morning, but they really chewed her up heavily with their 8-inch guns. And then they blew the bow off the Chicago with the torpedo. And then the Jap force came around and they had to pass directly by the Astoria, Quincy, and Vincennes. And incidentally, during all this, there were rain squalls separating because it was in the tropics and very humid down there. It'd be clear, the stars would be shining, and in another minute it'd be raining like heck, and especially at night. Anyhow, the Japs passed by the Astoria, Quincy, and Vincennes, and they sank all 3 of them, of our cruisers, Astoria, Quincy, and Vincennes. So the only way they could get out then of this, the Jap admiral, he could have sunk every ship in there if he had only known that our carriers had left. So he swung out, and the only ship in his way was our ship, the Ralph Talbot. Well, we had watched this sea battle going on. So as these 7 or 8, I forget, Jap heavy cruisers passed by us, they all opened up on us. And they passed so close to us, they couldn't get their 8-inch guns down low enough to hit us. So all these projectiles were flying right over us. In other words, if you've been underneath 9 8-inch shells passing over you, it's an experience.
What would you relate it to? What kind of sound would it have?
I'd say like you're underneath a freight train that just went over your head.
That loud?
Oh yeah, it just and they come very fast too. They're really, but there's so many of them coming at you, because all these ships are firing at us. But we took hits from these ships, but not from their main battery. Like I said, because they couldn't get down low enough, their guns, and we were so close to them. And they hit us with their broadside, which were 4.7s. And I think we took either 4 or 5 hits, which really dinged us up pretty much and killed quite a few guys.
Were you returning fire at that time, too?
Oh, yeah. We were firing back at them. But, of course, our shells were much smaller than theirs, and I don't know if we hit them or what, I was on the bridge then, so.
It's almost like a bit of luck there, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Being too close to let the big battery get you.
Right, yeah, because one salvo, if it would have hit our ship, would have taking us right out of the water, you know.
Well, you know, you said you lost 3 cruisers that night. And
Actually lost 4 cruisers, counting the Aussie cruiser, the Canberra. We lost her, yeah.
Well, let me ask you, right to your left here are a lot of decorations. And can you kind of tell us what these are and what they represent?
Well, this one means here that, in fact, in the Tribune the other day, this nurse got this medal here. It's American Defense Medal.
Mm-hmm.
What it meant.
That's the blue one?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And this one here is the American Area Defense. This is the American...
Would that be like the Philippines, or
No,
would it
no.
be just that whole area?
Yeah, be the area of the United States out to the battle area of the Hawaiian Islands.
Okay.
That kind of a ring. Then this one is the National Defense Medal, and this bar on it means that I was with the fleet and we were in combat at the start of the war, and that was prior to the government issuing this medal. Here.
Which is?
This is the Pearl Harbor Medal.
Okay.
They an act of Congress issued that one. This is the Japanese occupation medal here. And this is the 4 years of good conduct. I had good conduct.
So you were one of the good guys.
Yeah.
And that picture that's up there, who is that?
That's me. That's me when I was taken when I was 19.
19.
Yeah.
So by that time, you'd been in the service a couple of years.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When you reflect back on your experiences there, what stands out the most about your experiences?
Well, the thing that, as far as war experience, I'm very proud of the ship that I was on. I mean, really, because it probably saw more combat, and I think a lot of it was luck, than probably, I would say 95% of all the ships that were in the war, I would say, without a doubt. You know.
Well, you were in 14 out of 17 battles that were fought in the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
That is an incredible number. I asked you earlier, and you indicated at that particular time there were no kamikazes, but when did you run into the kamikazes?
Well, the first kamikazes we saw that were actually doing the kamikaze bit was, we were operating with the Franklin, and an air raid came in, and our planes had shot down, before we could see them, our planes had victored in on them and shot down maybe 4 or 5. But when they passed our screen, we were firing at them then, because they had to pass by destroyer screen around the carrier. And then 2 of them dove right into the Franklin. And she had a strike right on her deck, and the strike means our aircraft were gassed up, their engines were running, they're ready to take off to bomb Formosa. Mm-hmm. And this kamikaze went right into these aircraft, a huge ball of fire. And then another one, right after that, went right into the same spot. When you have aircraft like that, there's no, if you don't shoot them down completely, in other words, it's like a human being, if you fire and hit him in the leg, and he can keep coming. But an aircraft, maybe you fired it and it would normally have been shot down, but these pilots had in their mind they were going to take it all away, right into our ships, you know. And so we saw many, especially at Okinawa.
Did you take any hits on your
Yes,
tower?
we took 2, but that was in Okinawa. We were on a picket line there 30 miles or miles north of Okinawa. That was our picket station. And every 10 miles was a destroyer, and it ringed Okinawa during the battle. And we had been up there about 3 days, and we'd already lost, I think, 10 destroyers. And we'd shot down several planes up there. And then I forget, I think it was April the 26th of 45 when they come in that night, and we took 2 kamikazes. But there were a whole bunch of them. There was at least 50 kamikazes up there, and 2 of them picked on us, you know. And then the third one dove into, we had a guy aboard ship, and the last kamikaze hit gun number 4, and naturally his gasoline went all over. And it went right into the depth charges. Well, we had 24 1,000-pound depth charges back there, which we carried for submarines. And the fire was going, and this guy washed the fire right off the deck. And the third kamikaze dove right into that fire, and it wasn't even on the ship.
In the ocean?
Yes. Right, it was right astern of us, you know.
Now, it seems to me you related to me that you had pretty good eyesight.
Very good.
And
Not now.
I don't remember. Yeah, same. You related to me something about spotting an aircraft one day that nobody else saw.
Right.
I can't remember the exact details of it.
Yeah.
Well, could you share that?
Sure. I can't remember which battle it was in. But anyhow, this aircraft was coming in. We didn't have it on the radar because our radar would pick up aircraft that had some altitude, but he was right on the deck. He was right low over the water. So I don't know why I spotted him, but I happened to be looking out the starboard side of the ship there, because I was always on the bridge. And I saw this aircraft. It looked just like a little dot. So I told him up on the director where it was, and the reason I could give him the angle was we had an azimuth right on each side of the bridge, and I swung the azimuth around, which is a compass, and it has a little deal on it that wherever you point this, you get a direction. Mm-hmm. So I told him where the aircraft was, because our fire director control was right above the bridge. And the officer was standing right there. His name was Walton. Anyhow, I told him, I said, Mr. Walton, we got an aircraft coming in right on the starboard beam. I said, and it's very low over the water. And I give him the angle. So they swung the director around. Of course, it has a very high magnified rangefinder on it, so they picked it up then. They could see it. So we opened fire on this aircraft at about, I'd say 15,000 yards. Of course, our guns weren't very accurate at that distance. And then it just kept coming. It didn't alter
When you
course.
said you opened fire, what kind of gun would that be?
5-inch. Yeah, we were firing broadside at him. But then he got within about, I think about 8,000 yards, and then our 40 millimeter, we had quad 40s on board, and they started firing. He just kept coming. And when he got within about 5,000 yards, then our 20s opened up on him. And when our 20 millimeter opens up on something, they're close. Anyhow, all the guns were firing, and just before he hit our ship, a 5-inch caught him right in the engine, I guess, because it blew the plane to smithereens. The pilot came out of it, half of him, he was blown right in half, and his parachute blossomed, and then he just settled down. We just kept going, you know.
Do you have a feeling during this attempt to shoot down this plane that maybe he wasn't going to be shot down?
Oh, yeah. And another couple of seconds and I wouldn't be talking to you right now because he's heading right for the bridge.
Nowhere to go, right?
Absolutely no place. I just stood there and watched him, you know. And I was thinking to myself, come on, you guys, get on the ball here.
Well, you know, during the waning days of the war, you were still on the Talbot.
Oh, yeah.
And you were radioed to pick up survivors of the USS Indianapolis.
Right.
And they just made a delivery of some significance to Tinian. Isn't that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we didn't know what was aboard ship, but later we found out they were delivering the A-bomb to the island of Tinian, where our B-29s took, I don't know, I think it was the first one that hit Hiroshima, but I can't tell you for sure. Anyhow, they had dropped the A-bomb off, and they didn't know what it was either. In fact, one of the guys said they figured the big box on the deck of the ship was a box of toilet paper for General MacArthur. That was his saying. Anyhow, we were patrolling about 300 miles north of Ulithi. That was the war was still going on. And I think it was the first bomb because the war wasn't over or anything. Anyhow, when they dropped this package off, or however it was, in whatever container it was in, we never saw that. We got a message that there were some men in the water between Ulithi and the Philippines. But the message we got, it was from a PBY, one of our aircraft, was that possibly a freighter of ours, or an Australian freighter, because they operated, and they operated independently sometimes, had been sunk and there were survivors in the water. But we were about 300 miles from this location. So we cranked on 30 knots, which is a little over 30 miles an hour. That's about our maximum speed. And we got to the area at dawn the next morning. And then we picked up survivors in the water, both dead and alive. And it turned out that they were survivors from our heavy cruiser, the Indianapolis. But we didn't know it until we picked up.
And that was the ship that had delivered the bomb to Tinian.
Yeah.
Well, in effect, you were on the very first action of the war in the Pacific, right? Watching that bomb drop on the PBY hangar, and then the rescue of survivors from the USS Indianapolis. Is that right?
That's correct.
So
there were other destroyers there too.
Right.
When we were there picking up survivors.
But in effect, you started the war and were in battles all the way to the end of the war. Well, let me ask, have you been to any of the Pearl Harbor survivor reunions?
We were at the one in 1971, and then this last one in 2001.
Well, you know, I really don't mean to be insensitive, but what are your feelings about when you see each other, that there are fewer and fewer people at each reunion?
Oh, yes. There are, out of 300 and some people that were aboard our ship,